Game or die.
Hello and welcome to the UKGN podcast. I'm Zoidberg. This is the final week of our month of sport, but for this show we're going to ditch the traditional sports in favour of something more extreme. Before we start though, what is an extreme sport exactly? Wikipedia describes them as activities perceived as involving a high degree of risk. What this means is that they usually involve people hurling themselves directly at danger or off high places willingly. In video game terms, you can go right back to the mid-80s to find the first skateboarding games, a time when everyone wanted to be Marty McFly. Games like 720 Degrees from Atari, Skate Crazy from Gremlin Graphics and Skate or Die from Electronic Arts all tried their hands at bringing the thrill of skateboarding to gamers, with varying degrees of success. Two-wheeled thrill seekers also got a few notable games during this period, including BMX Simulator and of course Paperboy. The big boom came in the PlayStation era, courtesy of Activision and the Tony Hawk franchise, more of which in a bit. The success of those games brought dozens of copycats, along all manners of different sports. BMX, surfing, inline skating and even hoverboarding all got the Tony Hawk treatment, and EA themselves even launched the EA Sports Big label specifically for extreme sports. While there were decent offerings during this period, like Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX and Grind Session, it also influenced games like The Simpsons Skateboarding, so it wasn't all good news. In the modern gaming market, extreme sports games are not as common as they once were, but that doesn't mean that there aren't games out there worth playing. Ubisoft's Steep came out a couple of years ago and was an enjoyable winter sports collection featuring snowboards, wingsuits and skis. The Trial series from Red Link captures the thrill and danger of stunt riding in a perfect arcade package. And then there's Roll7's brilliant Ollie Ollie, which is one of those games that you can't put down once it grabs you. The failure of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 means that we'll probably never see more than the odd game every now and then, which is a shame. As we're about to show you, when extreme sports games are good, they're very, very good. These are our all-time top 5. Number 5. Skitchin. At first glance, EA's Skitchin looks like Road Rash with rollerblades, which is hardly surprising as it comes from the same development team. While the basics of racing are similar, learning how to maintain your speed by grabbing onto passing vehicles makes for a completely different experience. Early levels give you the time to learn how to play with opponents that barely retaliate, but as you advance through the levels they get more and more aggressive. Fortunately, there are plenty of weapons that you can pick up to help you fight back, and unlike Road Rash, doing so doesn't harm your chances of winning. An excellent split-screen 2-player mode made this a game that you dig out for a bit of friendly competition at every available opportunity. Number 4. California Games. California Games was first released in 1987 for 8-bit computers, most notably the Commodore 64. But for by far the best version we skip ahead 3 years, to the release of the Atari Lynx. In much the same way as Tetris and the Game Boy, this was the game that we always think about whenever anyone mentions the Atari handheld. The number of available events was reduced from 6 to 4, but Frisbee and skating were not missed. Each one that's left has benefited from the extra development time, with significant gameplay improvements over the original release. BMX in particular is a completely different proposition, and much more fun to play. The instant restarts on each sport make it a perfect game to play over and over again, as you strive for ever higher scores. You'll be humming the excellent soundtrack for days afterwards. Number 3. Skate 3. Skate 3 is easily the best looking skateboarding game ever made, with a realistic open world to explore, although that realism does tend to mean that there are large sections where there's nothing to grind or jump off. Don't let that put you off though. Mastering the flick stick controls is no easy task, requiring you to be dedicated and patient, but when you do, it's quite unlike any other game in its field. It's the only example we can think of where a game's online servers were switched back on due to a massive surge in popularity with streamers 8 years after the game's initial release, and it was also one of the most demanded games for Xbox backward compatibility. There's a very good reason why every video and trailer that EA release these days gets bombed with #Skate4 comments by the dozen, so far to deaf ears. So how about it, EA? Number 2. SSX Tricky. From 1080 to Cool Borders, there are plenty of good snowboarding games across gaming, but for sheer fun nothing comes close to EA's SSX. The first game was the surprise jewel in the PS2 launch lineup, throwing realism out the window by allowing you to perform outlandish aerial manoeuvres that simply wouldn't be possible in real life. but it was the second game that capitalised on the success by making something even better. SSX Tricky was more of an update than a full sequel, with rejigged versions of some of the first game's tracks, but it also added a couple of new ones, and the changes that were made were exactly what the game needed. It also added Uber tricks, which were the ultimate way to show off your skills. There are some out there that consider SSX 3 to be the series' high point, but for us, the Run DMC soundtrack alone means it's tricky every time. Number 1. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. You can measure a game's greatness by just how much it appeals to someone who has no interest in the subject matter. And before the Tony Hawk series came along, I didn't even know what an ollie was, never mind attempted one in real life. Pro Skater 2 features some of the best levels in the series, particularly School 2, and is the purest version of the signature gameplay loop that the series is known for, and it's all played out against arguably the greatest licensed soundtrack ever. This was the game that introduced the manual to your trick roster, allowing you to link together tricks for truly massive combo scores. It's the simplicity of the controls that make it our number 1 though. No matter how difficult a challenge may appear, you'll always feel that it's within your capabilities as a player. Later entries in the series would introduce more features, but mostly they were to the detriment of the game. Now it's time to take a look at this week's news. Luigi's Mansion 3 is looking excellent and a more than worthy entry in Nintendo's Ghostbusting spin-off series, and now it's been given an official release date. It will arrive for Nintendo Switch on October the 31st, which is of course Halloween, and it should be the perfect family game for the spooky season. If however you prefer your horror a little more gory, then October is also the month when Capcom released 2 more Resident Evil games on the Switch. Resident Evil 5 and 6 may be the most divisive entries in the survival horror franchise, but they both offer something for series fans. Number 5 is an excellent action-orientated entry that introduced co-op to the series and brought back Chris Redfield for the first time since Code Veronica. 6, on the other hand, gets a lot of bad press, and don't get me wrong, there's some terrible stuff in it, but the Leon section is great and definitely worth playing. Resident Evil 5 and 6 will be available on October 29th. One of the worst things about the current console generation is that we don't seem to get demos of games anymore. That's changed recently, for PS4 owners at least, with the recent Dragon Quest Builders 2 demo, and now we've seen 3 more quietly turn up on the PSN store this week. First up is the preview of Blood and Truth, the enjoyable Cockney shooter for PlayStation VR, and now is the perfect time to try it as the full game is currently reduced to £20 in the summer sale. Then there's Oninaki, the latest game from Tokyo RPG Factory, the developers of I Am Setsuna. This lets you play through the game's opening, and any progress will carry over to the full game when it's released in August. Finally, you get an early look at Catherine's Full Body, the HD remake of Atlas's excellent puzzle game from 2011. This adds new cutscenes, a brand new character called Rin, new gameplay mechanics, and an easier difficulty that will allow players to enjoy the story. All these demos are available to download now for free on the PlayStation Store. We live in an age where games no longer come to every system at the same time, and we're not fans of reviewing things for a second time. With that in mind, here's a brief rundown of some recommended games that were released this week for a new audience. Fans of arcade shoot-'em-ups and screen-filling bosses should take a look at Raiden 5, which just launched on Switch, having been on the Xbox One back in 2016. We reviewed it at the time, and you can find that review on our YouTube channel. PS4 owners get to try their hand at the excellent Wargroove, a turn-based strategy game inspired by Advance Wars that doesn't pander to casual gamers. Finally, there's Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom, which is now out on Steam at a considerably more attractive price than it was on consoles. If you have fond memories of playing the Wonder Boy series on the Master System, then this is definitely the game for you. Let's shift our attention over to the new games we've been playing with this week's reviews. Nightcore is a noir mystery set in Paris that sees you take on the role of a Twilight taxi driver looking for a serial killer amongst your nightly passengers. Without any evidence, you must pay close attention to each client's stories to determine who the killer is. It has a fantastic atmosphere, with the minimalist graphical style complementing the events as they unfold. The passengers themselves are not what you'd expect either, and you'll find yourself driving around Santa, a ghost, and even a cat at various points. The individual stories are always interesting, and you'll always want to see how they pan out. The gameplay also requires you to manage your finances to ensure that you can buy fuel for the next journey. A single investigation takes you through 7 nights, and will take you about 3 to 4 hours depending on what passengers you decide to pick up as they appear on the map. For fans of atmospheric adventures, it's definitely worth a look. Bourne is one of those games that's best played in a relaxed state, and the muted colours of the visuals coupled with the ambient soundtrack certainly help it work. It's an enjoyable platform puzzle game that feels reminiscent of Monument Valley in the way that your character runs along and around each level, defying gravity as you work out how to reach the collectible crystals. Like all good puzzle games, it has a strong and easy to understand set of rules that it follows, and each level offers new twists on those rules without breaking them. More importantly, the eureka moment when you finally stumble on a solution is very satisfying. Sadly, there's a disappointingly small number of levels here, and it will only take you a couple of hours to finish. For a different kind of puzzle game, there's Automa Chef, which is Team 17's latest game to bring kitchen thrills to the world of gaming, but don't go expecting another Overcooked. Your aim is to build a fully automatic kitchen with cunning placement of ovens, grills, conveyor belts and robot arms, and the introduction of each new dish is a new challenge. Even though there is a tutorial, it doesn't tell you half of what you can do, and encourages you to experiment with everything. Scrapping everything and starting again is a regular occurrence, and the levels can get quite intense as the equipment gets overloaded with all the wrong ingredients. It's all good fun and proves that just because a game looks dull doesn't mean that it is, and best of all, it'll only cost you a tenner. Powerumi describes itself as a Neo-Aztec shoot-'em-up, which actually sounds pretty cool, but sadly a more accurate description would be that it's bland and forgettable. The problem isn't the visuals, where it's always obvious what's going to hurt you and what isn't. The problem is the confusing colour-based weapon system. You have 3 weapons represented by red, green or blue, and enemies to match. Depending on which ones you shoot, you can either restore your shield, build up your special power or deal additional damage, but in practice it's never obvious which one you're doing. If the game had taken its time to introduce each weapon slowly, maybe this problem could have been alleviated. As it is, this game is a frustrating mess that we can't recommend playing. In our month-long celebration of sporting games, there's one area that we haven't covered. When it comes to futuristic sports, the conversation starts and stops with the Bitmap Brothers Speedball 2 Brutal Deluxe, so that makes it our retro game of the week. Rollerball was the obvious inspiration for this timeless classic, as 2 teams enter the steely cold arena, decked out in armour as they battle for possession of the ball. Scoring a goal is your main objective, but there are also many other ways that you can add to your final score. The arena features many targets for you to aim the ball at, and these can add a score multiplier to your team or take away from the opposition. You even receive points if you manage to injure one of the opposing team's players. There have been many attempts to remake the game, and even a sequel on the PlayStation, but none come close to matching the original. Now if you'll excuse me, I hear the ice cream seller coming. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this week's show. We hope you enjoyed it. New episodes are available every Friday at 7 PM. Search for us on SoundCloud, Spotify or YouTube to catch up on any episodes that you might have missed. If you agreed or disagreed with anything that we said on this week's show, maybe we didn't mention your favourite extreme sports game, then drop us a line in the comments. We'll be back next week at the same time with some more retro gaming chat and reviews of the latest games, including the new Fire Emblem and Wolfenstein. See you then.